Chapter 3. Company. A watery sun was rising somewhere behind the curtain of heavy grey clouds as each of the Aguiar stood on the outskirts of the forest and looked over their shoulder one last time at Feldnor, their home. As they left, it stood quiet and still, as if loyally saying to them, "Don't worry, I'll be here when you want to come back." It also felt like it added in a whispered undertone, "And be sure not to forget about me, or I'll be very upset." Despite his protestations, Aunt Bolivia came to see Honno off. She'd also brought along a small cartload of supplies for everyone. Seeing as most of the Aguiar didn't have families of their own, she felt it was her responsibility to make sure they all had something to eat. "I know you," she said, piling bundles of goods into their bags. "You'll get hungry, then go into denial and get all grumpy."
"Thanks, you don't need to, we're fine,"
muttered Honno, as she thrust an immense wooden flask into his arms.
"What's this?"
"Soup."
"Auntie really will be fine."
"Take the food, Honno." Honno didn't bother arguing back. They each slung the bags on and felt their feet sink several inches into the ground under the weight. Aunt Bolivia waved them off, only looking the slightest bit forlorn, before retreating back under the canopy and disappearing from sight. From the treetops, the White Queen, Feldnor's protector and proud mother of Delilah, watched the Aguiar leave, her face as inscrutable as ever. When they had cautiously approached her to ask if she would guard Feldnor in their stead, she had, of course, agreed, even though she didn't know why they asked, as she already did it anyway. At their request, she had also agreed to let her eldest daughter travel with them. She didn't know why they asked her this either, as Delilah was obviously desperate to get out and explore. Wasn't it clear she was going to get her way? The White Queen supposed that, due to their short lives, there was so much this small group of Feldnotians didn't know yet. Being a mother, the White Queen knew a lot. Being a guardian to the entirety of Feldnor meant she knew an awful lot, even more than Aunt Bolivia. What this journey meant, what it could do to each of them, what was in that soup. She knew Delilah and her friends would have to summon all the fortitude they had if they were to overcome everything that lay ahead. To sink or to swim. She sighed and pushed a lock of long white hair out of her face. Long hair could be very beautiful, but it got everywhere, no matter who you were. In the grassy plains below, the Aguiar wound their way towards Nausea and the sea. Leaving home felt like wading through thick mud, which to some extent they actually were, and none of them were in any great hurry. Nevertheless, the pull of the road ahead gently insisted they go on, away from what they knew and into uncertainty. It was a long walk across the plains to Nausea. They would have moved swifter if it weren't for the sludge and slurry of the paths. Once upon a time, these had been firm and dusty, well trodden by wayfarers. Now the ground was saturated, making the close-set rise and fall of the land a nest of traps for sudden slips and twisted ankles. By the time the group passed under the main gate of the capital city, all of them felt weighed down with damp trousers, a grumpy mood, and the knowledge that it was a long while until dinner. In contrast to his companion's sodden dreariness, G.A. was in a relatively good mood, not least because he was the only one who hadn't fallen into cold mud. He enjoyed seeing the familiar streets of Nausea once again, the setting for numerous strange childhood adventures. He also found it a great relief not to be burdened with worrying about keeping Delilah secret while digging up the mysteries of her past, like on his previous visit. Out of respect to the ever-superstitious residents of Nausea, Jair had dispensed with his usual cape and concentrated on being as translucent as possible, although his blue eyes still stood out quite clearly as he floated beside Delilah. No self-respecting Nausean went out in weather like this. That said, the Nausean street sellers were a breed apart and weren't hampered by such trivialities as infinite precipitation. Things needed selling, and they were going to sell these things even if it meant drowning in the process. Ducking and diving between bunches of lobster claws, stacks of bracelet, jars of pickled beard shavings, don't ask, and towers of beeswax, Abram suggested they buy a little food. Although they had more than enough from Aunt Bolivia, holding purchases might at least fend off the weaker sellers who only gave up after being ignored twice. This decision lifted all their spirits, though considerably deflated G.A.'s. Despite not actually having a stomach to make him hungry, he still knew how he had once loved fried aubergine and mushrooms in steam-baked bread. Seeing the others eating such good food made him feel separate and a bit lonely. He was still kicking himself about how he had missed a chance to eat food not too long ago, when, thanks to a red moon and liquid red magic, he had briefly regained a physical body. Too bad I had to be preoccupied with having a mental breakdown to have any breakfast, he thought, staring longingly at his brother's meal.
Go away,
said E.A., not needing to look to know his brother was hovering behind him with wide, curious eyes. I just want to look at it, G.A. sighed plaintively.
You're being annoying,
said E.A., holding his food a little closer. Please?
No.
Oh, just kill me now, groaned the thwarted ghost. Bit late for that, isn't it? Cut in Annie, dancing alongside them. G.A. howled. Annie collapsed into giggles. Don't worry, love you really, she teased, patting his blue outline kindly. You don't have to eat, so you'll never get tummy ache. That is a plus, I suppose, said G.A., looking immediately happier as they rounded a corner and emerged onto the harbour. Because you're dead, I wonder if you could eat food if it was dead too, Annie wondered. But to be food, the food has to be dead anyway, and stuff like veggies are already dead because you dig them up. But you say ghosts can't eat those. G.A., is being dead actually your excuse not to eat your greens? Annie stared at the ghost suspiciously, but to her fury, G.A. wasn't paying attention. Spinning her head in all different directions, she spotted what he and the others were staring at. A small flock of Nausian errand runners and officials were scurrying to and fro among scattered crates, barrels, sacks and boxes. More Nausians, who were not in royal uniform but dressed in sturdy, weather-worn travelling clothes, were carving paths among them like sharks in a shoal. They were calling instructions and guiding the scurrying activity up and down a broad wooden gangplank which stretched from the harbour wall up onto the upper deck of a sailing ship. By Nausian standards, it wasn't particularly glamorous. It was 103 feet long and looked slightly squashed. There were no carvings on the prow, nor a name emblazoned on the stern, but its decks were alive with hustles and indeed several bustles, as everything on the harbour was loaded aboard. In the eye of the storm of activity, one figure immediately stood out. Prince Tepid was positioned amidst the crates and barrels, gazing serenely at the busy scene. An errand runner was waving a waterproof parasol above his blazing ginger hair, as if the rain might extinguish it. He was dressed in glorious dark blues and gold, with the most enormous wide-collared cloak slung about his shoulders and pinned with the leaping fish of the Nausian coat of arms. The errand runner spotted Abrian and Honno standing in front of the ATR and whispered something to Tepid. The prince spun about at once, nearly sending the poor errand runner flying, spotted the failed notions, and flung himself towards them with all due pomp and theatre.
"You're here, at last!"
he declared, sweeping towards them with arms wide, but stopping short by several inches when he saw how muddy they were.
"Isn't this all marvellous? I honestly cannot express how pleased I was when I heard you, of all people, had taken the job."
"Of all people?" muttered Morphea, her eyebrows raised.
"It seems you owe me nothing, yet I owe you more and more."
Tepid laughed.
"I see you've come prepared with your usual troop, although, my, I must say I haven't met some of you before."
Delilah jumped as she was elbowed in the ribs. "Oh, me? Sorry, my name's Delilah, Your Highness. I'm travelling with the
Say now, you aren't that Delilah that I was supposed to marry not so long ago?"
interrupted Tepid suddenly, squinting shrewdly at her. Delilah felt her face turn scarlet. "Yes, Your Highness, but it was all a bit of a mix-up, actually," she said nervously.
"Oh, yes, complete ignorance on the part of my counsellors, those rascals,"
said Tepid jovially.
"So you must be the daughter of failed Norse White Queen. How nice to finally meet you in person. Not to worry, I don't think I will ever marry you."
He smiled reassuringly. Delilah smiled back, feeling very relieved at how relaxed Tepid was. "Shh, G.A., that's not necessary," she muttered as Tepid turned away. Beside her, G.A. was growling quietly, his eyes fixed on Tepid. "You wouldn't mind telling us what exactly is happening, Tepid?" asked Morphea. "The summons you gave us said that if we travelled to Nausea, we'd be given transport to get us to where we needed to go. Abrion's calculated a rough idea of the part of the sea we'll need to get to. Should be a bit of a long walk over land, but with some good boots we'll be all right. Is that what's in all those crates over there?"
Well, boots are part of the contents, yes,
said Tepid, looking a little confused.
"But you'll be travelling on foot, yes?"
interrupted Abrion.
"It's all planned out in here."
He held out a scroll of parchment.
"We've all agreed that's how long adventures to get to faraway places with a relatively large group of interesting individuals goes. It says so in all the good books. I've had EA check."
Tepid peered at the plan and the crude sketch of a map at the bottom.
"No,"
he said slowly.
"I'm afraid that is the wrong place entirely. The location we're heading to is far more likely over here."
He indicated somewhere far off the edge of the page.
"Though, of course, we will be stopping here first."
He pointed to a blank space in Abrion's drawing.
"And travelling in this,"
he added, straightening his collars and turning to the ship.
"Be good fellows and scurry along there. I must go and have a word with my official steward, but I shall be with you in 2 shakes of a fish's tail."
Before they could say a word, with another swirl of his cloak, Tepid had sashayed back into the crowd. A tall person in an expensive-looking coat was waiting and immediately engaged him in a serious conversation. The ATR were dumbfounded. Delilah looked from one to the other, wondering what was going on, as Abrion wheeled to face the others.
"Did he say what I think he said?"
"Aren't we in charge?" asked Dominator, a fuse sputtering somewhere dangerously close to his patience. "Evidently, someone else has their own plans too," said Morphea darkly.
"We're the ones who have Abrion's theory,"
hissed Honno.
"We're doing them a favour."
"But the summons said Tepid did have his own theory too, didn't it?" said Delilah.
"Mine was better. I like walking,"
said Abrion irritably.
"Excuse me, are you lot the failed notions who are coming with us?"
The ATR paused in their debate and looked around. One of the Nausians, dressed in travelling clothes, was standing beside them, looking impatient. Dominator puffed up his chest, the fuse now making steady, resolute progress. "We are the anti-Tepid revolution, if that's what you're asking." The Nausian arched an eyebrow.
"You wear all that mud all the time?"
"Excuse me,"
said Honno angrily.
"We weren't expecting company on this mission."
"Weren't you told?"
said the Nausian, looking at them as if they were a bit slow.
"His Highness the Prince has had it all arranged."
"Of course he has,"
muttered Honno. "What kind of mode of transport did you have in mind exactly, oh informative people?" said Dominator, the fuse nearing its destination. The Nausian stared at Dominator, raised his eyebrows significantly, and looked to the ship. "What?" asked Dominator, a firm advocate of denial. "Is it packed inside those barrels? Will you and His Highness over there carry us? It had better well and truly not be that boat." "This is a journey across the sea, isn't it?" whispered Delilah. "Yes, but boats have nothing to do with it," shouted Dominator, the fuse inches from hitting home.
"Well, we can all feel equally disappointed at the moment,"
said the Nausian, not fazed in the slightest.
"Now the captain's waiting. Will you get on board or be thrown on board?"
"We are failed notions. We are built for trees, sitting in them, living under them, and keeping our feet on the ground,"
protested Abrion, as he and the others were shoved up the gangplank.
"So, you have finally decided to join us,"
said a cool voice. A person was standing in the midst of the chaos, reams of parchment in one hand, heavy scarring and a quill in the other. He was almost completely bald, with silver stubble on his chin and piercing grey eyes with one pupil larger than the other.
"I admit, I expected more from the infamous anti-Tepid revolution. Going by your talk alone, I wouldn't have thought you skilled enough to know how to fix this rain. The mud doesn't help, I might add."
"And who are you?" demanded Dominator, shaking himself loose and glaring at the newcomer.
My name is Oola Haran, and I run this ship as its captain,
he said. His manner was curiously calm, but mists of foreboding crept towards everyone as they met those eyes. Even Dominator held back a moment. Captain Oola put the papers aside and folded his arms with an appraising stare.
And you are our party. Intriguing.
His eyes fell on each of them, lingering the longest on G.A.
Very intriguing,
he said.
Who's your friend who's lurking out of sight?
He's clearly Aluiciuous,
said Abrian.
He's a ghost, and he's coming with us.
Feeling distinctly awkward, G.A. cautiously came forward, fading from opaque to normal blue. Whispers scattered from the Nausians like marbles. Captain Oola looked long and hard at him.
Tell me,
he said.
Do you count yourself as lucky?
I don't know what you mean, said G.A.
A ghost is a curious creature. You've died, but you're not with the dead. What does that say about you?
I'm not in the wrong place, said G.A. with a hint of defiance. I'm exactly where I need to be. Oola's mouth twitched, his expression unreadable.
Aren't we all?
G.A. didn't know what to say, but the captain had already straightened up to address the rest of the ATR.
You will all of you understand myself and my crew accept no responsibility for you. I expect you to accept full responsibility for your own welfare, and that each of you will pour every effort into every task asked of you.
What do you mean?
Blurted out Honno.
Do you mean we're going to sail?
Captain Oola turned his gaze to him, seemingly amused.
You will all learn on the job. I won't have you doing nothing on your way to whatever's making the rain.
Actually do sailing?
Said Abrian incredulously.
But I'm already fully educated in other occupations. My head hasn't got the room.
Your job is to deal with the source of the rain,
said Oola.
My job is to make you suffer. But fear not.
He smiled.
You'll get used to it.
The sound of footsteps rose up the gangplank as Tepid appeared. As he stepped aboard, the errand runner behind him folded up the parasol, passed it to Tepid as if it were a sword, bowed and backed away down the gangplank. This was more difficult than it first appeared, and there was a soft scuffle and a thud before they reached the bottom.
I do believe that's the last of it,
said Tepid, glancing at the receding luggage.
I shall hand over to your good guidance, my dear Captain, as you've already met my comrades.
He nodded towards a very sour-looking ATR, who all collectively felt the rug had been thoroughly pulled from under their feet.
Let's see now. Permit me to introduce...
But the captain interrupted.
Forgive me, sire. I do believe introductions will have to wait. We are on a schedule and the prevailing winds won't last.
Tepid smiled.
Oh, quite right, quite right. Thank you for reminding me.
He leaned over the rail and called to the gaggle of errand runners on the harbour wall.
You lot can head off now. I will be returning soon enough. The city is in your hands, my dear Oswald. I'm sure it will be in one piece when I arrive back.
This he spoke directly to a tall person, the one wearing the expensive-looking coat. They all bowed respectfully.
We will have all the necessary arrangements in place for your swift return, sire. Wonderful, wonderful. It pains me to leave. I miss your little faces already.
Tepid called, waving cheerfully.
For that significant meeting you're due to attend. What? Oh, we're moving. Must be off now. Goodbye,
said Tepid, apparently unable to hear him over the gentle breeze.
May safety and soft seas greet your highness,
called Oswald. The errand runners about him chorused the same as the mooring lines were loosened and great poles pushed the ship away from the harbour walls. Very slowly, the vessel inched its way from the mild sea, scooped in the arm of the breakwater. Then the waiting current that threaded its way across the feet of the headland began to pull at its hull. The sails began to ripple with a restless wind, and the prow turned away from the tumble of buildings, high cliffs and stone walls of nausea, and set its sights on the grey line of the horizon ahead.